All right, let's get to the top 10 tight ends in the 2025 NFL Draft. These are my rankings. Bud's going to critique them. He's going to tear them apart right after this. But let's roll through. Colston, Loveland, Tyler Warren, neither tested. They're 1-2. They're super close on my board. Whichever order you want, just draft one. They're great. Loveland, more your spread, wide, slot, wide receiver-ish type, but who can grow into an inline guy. Warren, ready-made NFL inline tight end. I went Harold Fannin at 3. This is a little bit of a call. He didn't obviously test great for an undersized guy. But everything I've heard from the Bowling Green coaches, they rave about him. Everything I've watched on tape, the fact that he almost had 50% of their yardage says that he can do something at the NFL level, even if he's a weird athlete. When you see the duck-footedness, the knock-kneedness, him turn and run some routes, it doesn't always look pretty, but the guy can play ball. I have Terrence Ferguson, Oregon, tight end 4. We highlighted his combine earlier. Gunnar Helm, we highlighted it in a negative light, but I have him at 5. He may be moving down, though, after this. Elijah Arroyo from Miami, 6. Mason Taylor, 7, son of Jason Taylor, old school Miami defensive end. Thomas Vadone from Nebraska at 8. Jackson Hawes, Georgia Tech, 9. And then Jalen Conyers, bringing it up the top 10 from Texas Tech, the Arizona State transfer. All right, Bud, who's too high? Who's too low? Who's just right? Start too high.
I had Ferguson as too high here just because I thought, why not take the opportunity to run the agility drills and show that you can, sit down and then actually change direction, which I thought in college at times he didn't do great, but also, to your point, well, I'll let you bring it up, but obviously you've seen him do it in person rather recently.
Yeah, so the Senior Bowl, I was so impressed with his ability at the top of routes, just to, I feel like I often conflate playing wide receiver or tight end, receiving positions in the NFL or football, with playing on a basketball court. They're very similar. In basketball, you got to get around a guy who's right in front of you to get to a spot. That's kind of similar to running a route. You have to get around a guy, especially against man coverage. You got to get around the guy who's right in front of you. And a lot of tight ends, I think, struggle to have that side-to-side, just short area quicks to just get that. And at the Senior Bowl, not a ton of routes, but I saw that from him in a way that not a lot of guys 6'5" in the 250-ish pound range have. So then to back it up with the testing he had, that's why I moved him up. I had Helm ahead of him prior to the combine, but Ferguson up to 4 after the combine. But we'll see. I do agree that it's suspect that he didn't do the short shuttle or the 3-cone after. If you're that good of an athlete, just do it.
I think these are good rankings. You have 2 guys who have proven it with a ton of college production. We know Loveland's a special receiving guy. He was a receiver out of Idaho, right? And then
yes.
Michigan found him. We liked some of the testing stuff at 24/7 Sports. We actually got a 4-star grade on him, so I was like, cool. That's a nice win for us. Come draft time. I mean, Fannin, all year on the Cover 3 podcast, I had Warren 18-1 to win the Mackey Award for the best tight end in college football. A lot of our listening audience had bet Fannin, so it was kind of back and forth. So, really familiar with his game. Like you said, a special receiving threat. They're doubling him a lot, and they're still finding ways, to get the ball to him. If I'm betting on upside, and Helm, Texas coaches raved about Helm in a way that I'm not sure they love everybody on that team. It just does all the little things right, really good understanding of the game. I think in the blocking game reacts to what the defender is doing pretty well. But Arroyo, man, physically I think is maybe different than some of these guys in terms of next level ability. So once I get past 1-2, I might just jump down and take Arroyo, man. That's a special kid.
Truly. That's why I think after the top 2, I'd be surprised if anyone has a different top 2. Those guys are, like I said, they're just good. You know what you're getting with those 2. After that, if you want to take Arroyo next, I am not good because he is the next best athlete.
Yeah.
And if you go back and just look at the tight ends that end up booming, your big hits at tight end outside of top 75 picks, what are they? They are guys who run in the 4.5s. They are guys who are freak athletes who then figure it out. So we'll get to that in a little bit in the segments here, going through a little bit later, doing what we look for when scouting tight ends. But what I look for when I'm scouting tight ends is primarily athletic traits. It's not how do you have a feel for the position. That helps. But the guys that can develop are the guys who have high-end physical tools. And
to your point, I know we'll get to this in that segment. I think some other guys here have some tools that really kind of project well to the position. So Thomas Vadone out of Nebraska, he was our number 1 rated tight end coming out of high school at 24/7 Sports. Had 2 or 3 years where he just couldn't really do much at all due to injury at Nebraska. But shows up at the combine, huge hands, huge wing, has a frame of a guy. He looks like a future NFL tight end, and guy who plays hard. And I think the thing that is encouraging for me is that the testing numbers indicate that he, despite the injuries, he really hasn't lost much from what we saw of him, enough to rate him as the number one tight end coming out in that class. So if you're an NFL team, you're like, okay, like he still has it. He just needs to play more and like stay on the field, which is obviously availability is the best ability. But I think that's a guy to look at who could be a real asset in the blocking game as well. And I was intrigued by Jalen Conyers' testing numbers.
Yeah,
like that type of agility. You mentioned that the basketball, and I think the same thing. We're out at all these high school camps. We see these tall guys look real pretty running fast at tight end. But much like basketball, you only have such a compressed area to get open in, right? Mm-hmm. I need a guy that, if you're fronting him, can still be able to create his own entry pass lane. Like that's where tight ends work for the most part. Most of these guys are not running 40 yards down the field. I got guys that do that. They're called receivers.
Yeah, that's true. And the two you mentioned, Fedone and Conyers, are what you bet on, right? In terms of just going through the numbers here. Fedone went 4.7 in the 40, 35.5-inch vertical, 10.6 broad jump. Those are great explosive numbers. And then a 7.10 3-cone and a 4.29 short shuttle. Those are great times. That's great change of direction ability. And that's what showed on his tape. Truthfully, I hadn't watched him, his whole tape prior to the combine. I saw his test numbers, and I'm like, I got to watch this guy. And it backed that up wholesale. And with Conyers, I've known about him for a while. He's a unique body type at 6'3", 260. Dating back to Arizona, I loved his ability to break tackles, and he's one of the best tackle breakers in this draft class. But just 6'3", 260 is a weird body type at tight end.
On Fedone, did you see 10-6 hand, 34 arm, 157 10-yard split, which I think is much better than a lot of guys.
That's better than a lot of the wide receivers.
And then he broaded 126.
Yeah, that's the frame that you look for. I love long arms and big hands at tight end positions.
He's a guy who can do both, I think.
Yeah.
Like he could turn into a really good NFL blocker who can also catch balls.
Do not be surprised if that guy ends up going in the top 100 picks, just because, again, that's what it ends up looking like. All right, who's just right? You got too high, you got too low. Who's just right on this list?
I think it's the top two. Like, not overcomplicating it. It's Loveland Warren or Warren Loveland, depending on kind of what your preferred flavor is, right? Well, I think Warren's a little more of an inline guy. Loveland being a former receiver, high school. I mean, Warren's a quarterback, but in fact, on our 24/7 Sports thing, his photo is still from the Elite 11 quarterback camp, which is kind of funny. I think you got it right at the top, and that's just like not overcomplicating it. But those are the two guys I think you'd want to spend the more premium picks on, and then after that, it's everybody else has a little more risk perhaps to their game.
So we did this debate all last year with Brock Bowers and the whole how high is too high to draft a tight end. I think there are a few teams that, in retrospect, wish they would have drafted Brock Bowers. And I think where he went was not too high. It was too low in retrospect. So with Colston, Loveland, Tyler Warren, I think everyone has the same projection. It's like, yeah, they're just darn good tight ends. They could be all pros within their rookie contracts. How high is too high for you? Where are you taking them? Let's see. I'm trying to think of tight end needy teams. Number 5, Jacksonville. Is that obviously?
That's too high.
That's too high. Yeah. Down to, number 11, San Francisco. They could use George Kittle's in his early 30s now. How long does he have after the kind of miles he's put on his body? Is 11 too high for you?
It's probably a little bit too high. Okay. I don't think either of these guys are Bowers. I mean, Loveland, being kind of raw coming out of high school, I could see maybe there's some additional upside. I think we kind of know what Tyler Warren is, and there's some good athletes on that Penn State team. Both backs will be drafted. Singleton probably drafted really high next year. Now, receiver wasn't great for them, but they would put Warren in at quarterback and run like wildcat with their tight end, which speaks to the level of athleticism. That's a team that played for the Big Ten championship. So he is a really good athlete, but I don't think he's quite on that like Brock Bowers create his own separation level. And so I don't think I would take them higher than where Bowers. Well, maybe than where Bowers went, but not where Bowers probably should have gone.
Okay, so I think Bowers went 14, right? And so different class, though. Last year was a lot of blue chip guys. This year, not nearly as many. I do think 13 Miami is where it starts to get really like, I'm interested in a tight end. 14 Indianapolis. Like if those guys are on the board, they're very interested. 17 Cincinnati. It's like I would be floored if both those guys aren't off the board at that point, right? Like there's some needy teams in there.
I think Warren to Cincy would make some sense. Like with how he blocks.
Yeah, I would love the fit of both of those guys. Cincinnati.